Balita Ngayon.
Magandang araw Pilipinas, magandang araw Luzon, Visayas at Mindanao. Ngayon ay ika-26 ng Nobyembre 2022. Kathy Cruz ang inyong tagapag-ulat. Mag-uulat mula sa Makati City, Carlo Candelaria.
EdgePoint Infrastructure, an independent telecommunication infrastructure company, conducted a press briefing about their operations in the Philippines. In a briefing session in EdgePoint Philippines' new headquarters, media representatives heard from Suresh Sidhu, Chief Executive Officer of EdgePoint Infrastructure, and Alexander Kiel, Chief Executive Officer of EdgePoint Philippines, on the company's capacity to contribute to the country's telecommunications industry as a leading ASEAN-based independent telco infrastructure company. EdgePoint Towers Incorporated, or EdgePoint Philippines, is expanding options for telecommunications service providers in the country in line with the Department of Information and Communications Technology, or DICT's policy on shared passive telecommunications tower infrastructure, also known as the Common Towers Policy, that aims to strengthen communication services and digitalization in the Philippines. According to EdgePoint Infrastructure CEO Sidhu, the number of internet users in the Philippines has more than tripled in the past decade. According to him, the Philippines has a dense number of users per tower, which affects overall user experience, and the country needs a large number of new towers built to fill this gap and address the nation's connectivity needs. EdgePoint Philippines CEO Alexander Kiel said that he wants to create new job opportunities and introduce green solutions and practices. EdgePoint Philippines officially entered the Philippine market in April this year through a sale and leaseback agreement for 2,934 towers in the Luzon Island Group with Smart Communications Incorporated and Digital Mobile Philippines Incorporated, both wholly owned wireless communications and digital services subsidiaries of PLDT. Following the sale, Smart is leasing the towers from EdgePoint Philippines to serve its mobile communications and high-speed internet connectivity needs in the region. From Makati City, this is Carlo Luis Candelaria, KDP News.
Maraming salamat, Carlo Candelaria. At mula pa rin sa Quezon City, tunghayan natin ang nagaganap na Pandesal Forum tungkol sa Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement o EDCA. Isa sa mga inaasahan na panelist si Michael Billington ng LaRouche Movement mula sa USA at ng Schiller Institute mula sa Washington, D.C. Kasama rin si General Victor Corpus, isang geopolitics and defense analyst at isang retiradong general mula sa Armed Forces of the Philippines. Dati rin po siyang National Security Advisor at mula sa Intelligence Service of the Armed Forces of the Philippines o ISAP. Kabilang din si Ginoong Wilson Flores ng Kamuning Bakery at isang columnist mula sa Philippine Star. Siya po ay isang economics and political analyst. At ang ating ang moderator po ay si Professor Ana Maalindog o Professor Ana Malindog Puy. Siya po ang Vice President ng Philippine Asian Century. Siya po ay Vice President ng Philippines Asia Century Strategic Studies o PACS. At kabilang din po sa magsasalita ay ang syempre ang kilala rin po natin at nire-respeto, no, mula sa LaRouche Philippines lead, walang iba kundi si Professor Antonio Butch Valdez. Tunghayan po natin sa ilang saglit.
statement, Mr. Josefa Ospino, Japan and the Philippines would like to have a BFA in order for the Japanese troops to conduct earth in the Philippines. On the other hand, the United States is also keen to set up more temporary military facilities accompanied with the prepositioning of U.S. military assets and certainly boots on the ground under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA. Under the 2014 agreement, the EDCA, the U.S. can build temporary structures for its troops and equipment in the Philippines, in our own military bases. According to some reports, the proposed additional location of these 5 more EDCA bases are Zambales, Cagayan, Isabela, and Palawan. Again, all of these are facing China, Taiwan, China, and the Korean Peninsula, which are all possible source or what you call flashpoints in the Asia-Pacific region. Likewise, the agreed location to store equipment and supply are the Basa Air Base in Pampanga, Fort Magsaysay in Nueva Ecija, Antonio Bautista Air Base in Palawan, and also the Benito Air Base in Mactan, Cebu, and Longvia Airport in Cagayan de Oro. So these are all the locations for equipment or prepositioning of U.S. military assets. According to the defense officials, at the moment, what is happening based on report is the defense officials and the Department of Foreign Affairs of the country are consulting regarding this proposal. And also one thing that I want to post to note here is that the 1987 Constitution bans foreign troops and foreign military bases on Philippine territory. In this regard, we are fortunate to have 3 panel of speakers who will discuss the implications and impacts on the country, the region, and the world at large of installing 5 additional IDCA bases in the country and having a BFA with Japan. So without further ado, let me call on Kamentong, or Mr. Herman Laurel, the President of Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute, to give us a backgrounder of the whole of this issue before I call on our next panel of speakers. Kamentong,
Yes.
you have the floor po.
Yes, magandang araw po sa lahat. Good morning to all, and thank you, General Victor Corpus, who's taken time out from his Bulacan area to join us, coming back to Manila to join us in our discussion today. We're still waiting, if possible, for Mike Billington to join us. He had a recent mild stroke, so it was uncertain up to last night, but he emailed that he probably can join, yet at the moment we're still waiting. Thank you, Cathy Cruz, for waiting with us, because Cathy Cruz will be facilitating Mike Billington's participation when if and when he comes in this morning. So this issue of the 5 additional EDCA bases that the Americans are seeking, which was highlighted by headline reports naming Pentagon officials as among the first to announce this, uncharacteristically and surprisingly, because it should be, as we all know, Filipino counterparts who should be announcing such things, but the headlines were quoting the Pentagon. Okay, and so this came from left field. It was very unexpected because the 5 EDCA bases that are already in the country and existing has always been very controversial already. And this was declared by several senators, including the late Miriam Defensor Santiago, as unconstitutional and illegal as far back as 2015. But the Supreme Court, under the Noynoy Aquino administration, gave its imprimatur, and we have this dilemma now of an illegal and constitutional decision accepted as a reality with many objections to it. At the same time, of course, it has been explained that this serves not the Filipino national interest, but American interest in promoting its geopolitical strategies and tensions and conflicts associated with the U.S. imperial or hegemonic strategies. So this additional 5 EDCA bases that the Americans are seeking really came from left field, very totally unexpected. And well, it is believed, of course, that this is also part of the push for the propaganda initiative of the Americans to promote the bases, while the April 2023 deadline for the review and maybe abrogation approaches, and with it the different stirrings of tempests in the teapot, such as the recent visit of Kamala Harris to the Palawan, to Palawan, and lately the space debris controversy, which we will show is a non-issue. But let's go back to the 5 initial bases and the 5 additional bases. There have been several very good discussions already via Zoom media fora, of which Madam Ana Malindogoy was also a participant, with Butch Valdez and Kit Tatad. So that was a very good discussion. Generally, everybody opposed the EDCA bases. However, in that discussion, maybe Ana can brief us later on. Harry Roque said that maybe it's not for the abrogation or termination of the MDT because the present administration may be deposed by the Americans, which later on he changed his view in some other interviews. But that is the implication of some of these things that are happening. And then, of course, our second issue, aside from the EDCA bases, is the Japanese VFA, Visiting Forces Agreement, that is now being proposed by the OIC of our Department of National Defense, retired General Faustino, which again came from left field. This was nowhere in sight at all before this past month. And again, it is very surprising because it does not serve Philippine national interests or welfare. The interest of the country today is economic recovery from the pandemic crisis and the sanctions wars initiated by the Western powers. And so this is a second issue that we will be tackling today, the VFA for the Japanese. And finally, the controversy generated by, again, I think the foreign media initiative describing the transfer of some space debris that the Philippine Navy was towing to the Chinese Coast Guard, which has been described as a seizure, as an encounter, when the Chinese Embassy and the South China Sea Probing Initiative, the Chinese Monitoring Institute, has denied that there was any confrontation, any tension in the issue. So we will look at this with General Victor Corpus and Wilson Flores. Now, let me just show you some points on the space debris. First image, if Joshua can show it on the screen. We had this news about China Coast Guard intercepting Philippine naval boats, Philippine naval boat towing suspected rocket debris near Pag-asa Island. The South China Sea Probing Initiative, appearing here as well as in the next slide, has stated that according to the international law, which we will also show later, and the principles adopted by the United Nations General Assembly, the ownership of objects launched into the outer space and their components belongs to the launching states. Wherever they are found, such objects and components shall be returned to the launching state. So the Palawan News official, for example, described it as an interception of the Philippine Navy boat, which towed the suspected rocket debris near Pag-asa Island. Next slide, please. This is what I researched on. There is a United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And in order to shortcut the study, I looked at a review of these voluminous rules of the Office of Outer Space Affairs by Paul B. Larson, a Georgetown University law professor. who, in one of his reviews, which I quote here, one section was about, quote, return of debris, Article 8 of the OST, I think that is the Outer Space Treaty, provides that space objects, including their components found outside their state of registration, must be returned to the state of registry upon proof of ownership. And that confirms the SCSPI's contention that it was right for the Philippines to turn over that piece of debris it found in the Pag-asa area. Next slide, please, Joshua. Let's take a look. And this is the statement that is quoted in many of the reports from Captain, I think she is now Major, that's why the news reports describe her as Major Cheryl Tindog, a spokesperson for the Philippines Military Western Command, who said the floating metal object appeared similar to a number of other pieces of Chinese rocket debris recently found in Philippine waters. She added the Filipino sailors did not fight the seizure, but they still use the term seizure. And this is what Tindog explained. Quote, we practice maximum tolerance in such a situation, unquote. And quote again, since it involved an unidentified object and not a matter of life and death, our team just decided to return, unquote. So I do not see any indication of intense tension in this description of what happened between the Philippine Navy or Coast Guard. It's not also very clear what ship exactly was involved and the Chinese Coast Guard. What another description that is relevant is that our Navy people or Coast Guard people described the Chinese boat that went to retrieve the space debris that I think is clearly technically belonging to China, because the Philippines does not have any rocket program, so it could not have been the property of the Philippines. And everybody recognizes that China just recently launched several rockets, and this in fact was all over the international news, the constant scaremongering about Chinese rocket debris, which actually again is a universal. Americans, Europeans, Japanese rockets, inevitably when they're put into outer space, there will be the rocket, the booster rockets, and so on that will return to Earth. And most of the debris are burned through the atmosphere before it splashes back to the Earth, or normally in other circumstances, the deserts where population is very, very sparse. So our next slide shows the dramatization of this by people, our officials, like NSA Chief Clarita Carlos, no, who says tiwala sa ulat ng Philippine Navy sa umano'y pag-agaw ng China sa floating debris. I'm not sure that is what the statement from Cheryl Tindog, Major Cheryl Tindog, depicts. No? Pag-agaw, I think if there may be some, because of language barriers and so on, some misunderstanding, it is not agawan. Ano? So I have to move my mic closer. I'm sorry if I was sounded weak and my voice was weak a while ago. So generally, these are the issues. And going back to the VFA for the Japanese, we are aware, of course, that there has been a campaign for at least the past 5 years with the greater degree of intensity, but it has been going on for around 10 years since the Asia Pivot announcement of the U.S. Under Obama in 2011, that there has been a lobbying by the U.S. for the Japanese to increase its military budget, change its constitution, revise its constitution, its pacifist constitution that allows only a defensive force and not any offensive force. Now, the latest development on this score is the intention of the Japanese parliament to hike defense spending to 40 trillion yen over the next 5 years, and that is almost a doubling. That's equivalent to $279 billion compared to China's existing military or defense budget of $250 billion. This will mean that the Japanese defense budget will be second only to the United States of America. Russia has only $50 billion defense budget. I don't know if they're increasing it, because there were some reports that they're increasing it to $65 billion or $70 billion. But the last information I have gathered about China's budget is $250 billion. And so this plan of Japan to increase its military budget, defense budget, is pushed through, then it will be larger than the Chinese defense budget. The report here says the amount compares with the 27.47 trillion yen in total, specified as the defense costs for 5 years through the fiscal 2023 in the country's medium-term defense program. So this is a very, very critical issue. We do not have a good experience with the Japanese defense forces in the past, of course, and we do not have much faith in the parliament that is increasingly becoming under the control of the militarist faction in Japanese politics. So that is my brief introduction to these issues, and back to you, Anna.
Okay po. Thank you so much, Mentong Laurel, the president of Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute, for that brief backgrounder and also situationer, no, of the two issues that we'll be tackling today. By the way, for our audience, both in live stream in social media network and also here in Zoom, you can please feel free to write your questions on the chat box or comments about this issue or perspective. No, we can be more interactive in this media forum. So to proceed, thank you again, Mentong. Our next speaker is a geopolitics and defense analyst, a retired Brigadier General of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. He's also a former National Security Advisor and the former Chief of Intelligence Service of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, or ASAP. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome General Victor Corpus. Sir Vic, you have the floor po.
Good morning. I would like to correct the introduction. I have never been a member or a national security advisor.
Okay po. Sorry.
Hanggang isap chip lang ang aking inabot.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much for that.
Okay, with regards to the issue of the new 5 EDCA bases that will be established in the Philippines, in addition to the 5 that is already here, I believe that this issue must be viewed in the context of the geopolitical situation in the region, particularly the intensifying rivalry between the US and China. This rivalry of the sole superpower and the rising power China started way back when the Soviet Union fell in December of 1991. Because 2 months after the Soviet Union collapsed, the US came out with a grand strategy, which is contained in the Wolfowitz Doctrine of 1992. This Wolfowitz Doctrine, ang gist nito ay the United States will not allow any country any peer competitor to approach parity, much more surpass the United States in economy, in technology, or militarily. Ito yung red line ng US na if any peer competitor will threaten to attain parity or surpass the United States in these three areas, the United States will conduct a preventive war to prevent that aspiring peer competitor by conducting a preventive war or launching a war against that peer competitor. So China at this time felt alluded to with this Wolfowitz doctrine. And that same year, in 1992, Deng Xiaoping, the leader of China at that time, came out with his own 24-character formula to counter the Wolfowitz doctrine. This 24-character formula by Deng Xiaoping, ito yung gist, ano? Observe calmly. Secure our position. Ibig sabihin nun na there was a time when Mao Zedong in the 1950s called for the Chinese nation to dig tunnels deep, store grains everywhere, but never seek hegemony. So this securing of our position involves the digging of thousands of strategic tunnels in China. So they continued Mao's formula of digging tunnels deep. So at the moment, they have thousands of strategic tunnels. Cope with affairs calmly. Notice that in that 24-character formula, Deng Xiaoping mentioned calmly twice. And I believe that this strategy of Deng is the one that saved China from certain destruction way back in 1999. When US and NATO bombers bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. If China did not follow this strategy formulated by Deng Xiaoping, there will be no China today. Because at that time, in 1999, China was not yet prepared to cope with a powerful US military. At that time, they don't have a single aircraft carrier. They don't have any weapons to fight against US, about a dozen US aircraft carrier battle groups and about 400 military bases that the US have deployed to surround China. So another of the 24-character formula is hide our capabilities and bide our time. I think that this capability it refers to the yung tinatawag nilang assassin's maze of China that they were developing to defend themselves against US aggression. This involves the development of anti-ship ballistic missiles that can sink aircraft carriers, that can shoot down satellites, and that can destroy all the 400 bases surrounding China. Yun yung tinatawag nilang assassin's maze. But then in 2007, pinabagsak ng China yung isang satellite nila. This was January of 2007. Signaling to the world that China has arrived. That China's assassin's maze has been completed. Ang ibig sabihin, if yung message that were sent by China when they shut down their own satellite, this satellite was traveling at hypersonic speed in outer space. And yet China was able to shoot it down with a land-based missile. So if China can shoot down an object running at hypersonic speed in outer space, what more of U.S. aircraft carriers that are traveling at snail's pace on sea or on the surface of the ocean? Or what more fixed bases that are deployed surrounding China? So in the event of war, this so-called China's assassin's maze can destroy all of the bases surrounding China, including the EDCA bases that we have here. They can destroy all the surface ships, like aircraft carrier battle groups, from Japan up to Guam, or even beyond Guam. That's the range of their DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missile. And they can shoot down the command, control, communication, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, what is called the C4ISR, that is satellite-based. They can shoot down the satellites as demonstrated when China shut down their own satellite in 2007. Now, in 2014, China has crossed the red line of the United States. This was the red line that was set by the Wolfowitz Doctrine. Because in 2014, the IMF announced that China has already surpassed the U.S. economy GDP measured in terms of purchasing power parity. So, this alarmed the United States Army, which went to RAND Corporation, commissioned the RAND Corporation to develop a grand strategy that will that is designed to stop China's rise by 2025. Ito yung ginawa ng RAND Corporation na entitled War with China, Thinking the Unthinkable. This grand strategy was adopted or came out in 2016. Yung pinagawa ng US Army noong 2015. And this grand strategy involves war with China that is conventional in nature, regional, and protracted. That is designed to bring down the GDP of China by as much as 35% by 2025. And that strategy has been ongoing up to now. Kaya nakikita natin yung economic war between China and the United States. Yung technological war between the two. And yung girian nila sa South China Sea at saka sa Taiwan, where the US continues to send its aircraft carrier battle groups to the Taiwan Strait. So, in 2019, another important development when the United States unilaterally withdrew from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty with Russia, banning the use of missiles with range from 500 to 5,500 kilometers. So the United States unilaterally withdrew from that treaty with the US with Russia, and the main purpose of that is so that the United States can position its missiles in Japan, in South Korea, in Australia, and the Philippines, and other Marianas Island properties or bases of the United States. If we allow the EDCA bases, if we allow the United States to position their INF missiles that can reach Beijing and Shanghai in about 15 minutes. Do you think that China will just sit down and watch? China will surely consider that move as a strategic first strike that necessitates an operational or tactical counterstrike. China will not wait for those US INF missiles to rain on Beijing and Shanghai, because they can monitor by satellites and by the unmanned aerial vehicles what is going on in those bases. You cannot hide if the United States will not admit whether they will be deploying nuclear weapons or not in those bases. That is their policy. They will not tell you. They will not tell us that they will be deploying missiles or nuclear missiles. But the problem is that once the shooting war starts between these two superpowers, tayong maiipit sa gitna. We will become the battleground. And the war can be nuclear in nature, because you can just imagine, if I'm China, dadating yung mga yung mga aircraft carrier battle groups ng US. Like what they did in 2004, yung Operation Summer Pulse, where they sent 7 aircraft carrier battle groups to converge near Taiwan. If they do that again in this situation, yung kasalukuyang kalagayan, China will shoot them, will sink all of those 7 aircraft carrier battle groups that will try to help Taiwan in case there will be a war there. China have that capability. And do you think US will not retaliate? And they will surely retaliate using nuclear weapons. And what will happen to us? We will become the battlefield. Like what they are doing now in Ukraine. Sino nagkakamatayan sa Ukraine? Yung mga Ukrainians, hindi mga Amerikano. Hindi mga Europeans. Do our leaders want that to happen to us? Make us another Ukraine? So, I would like to conclude by asking our leaders, cases in the Philippines beneficial to Philippine security national interest? To any right-thinking Filipino, the answer is obvious. So I end there.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, I just unmuted myself. Okay, thank you so much, General Victor Corpus, for that thought-provoking opening statement, which in most cases I agree. And yes, the question is being posed at the moment, no, to our leaders. Do we want to be the next Ukraine in Asia? So that's a very important question, I think, that not only the leaders of the country should reflect on, but even, I think, the Filipino people, because according to Sir Vic, any thinking Filipino, or even a Filipino who has a moral obligation and is a rational person, knows the answer to that question. But of course, the question has been posed to our leaders at the moment. So before, thank you so much, General Victor Corpus. Now we'll move on to the next and our third and last but not the least speaker for this morning. We're still waiting, by the way, for any confirmation if Mr. Billington will be able to speak even for a few minutes, no, in this media forum. But our third and last but not the least speaker for this morning is an economist and a political analyst. He's a winner of 15 Catholic Mass Media Awards, or CMMA, for Best Opinion Column and Best Business Column, including 3 CMMA Hall of Fame Awards. He's also a winner of 3 Palanca Literary Awards and author of 5 books. By the way, he is also one of the awardee for the awards for promoting Philippine understanding just this year, no, as outstanding, under the outstanding category. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, let us welcome Mr. Flores. Wilson, you have the floor. Take it away. Thank you.
Good morning, Professor Ana Malindog Uy, also to General Victor Corpus, and nationalist analysts who we all admire. Also, good morning to Mr. Mentong Laurel. I'd like to make a short presentation of some ideas on these 2 interesting and very urgent topics you raised. One is the request by the United States for additional 5 EDCA military bases all over the Philippines. And number 2, some politicians in our country, the Philippines, raising the possibility of BFA visiting forces agreement with Japan. The slide, please. This is the topic of my short talk. I agree with General Victor Corpus and Mentong Laurel and Professor Ana Malindog Uy. Ang topic of why more EDCA military bases of USA and why new BFA with Japan, instead of us concentrating, focusing to attract or invite USA and Japan investors to build factories and resorts instead of bringing more arms to the country. Number two question of my short talk, why not make the Philippines into a Switzerland of Asia instead of a possible next Ukraine of Asia, which General Corpus eloquently explained earlier. By the way, everybody knows Switzerland is one of the world's richest countries. Next slide, please. Ito ang this is very to me very disturbing. Why every time when we talk to our former colonizer USA, our traditional friend, why always the talk is about military sales, arms sales, military bases? Why not focus on inviting American businesses, Wall Street investors, factories, even tourism enterprises here to the Philippines to help our economy? Why do we allow our diplomacy with America to be set by Americans, to be dominated by their agenda and their national interest, which seems to be focused only on military strategic alliances, or even trying to bring us to their alliance against their perceived rivals, China, Russia, and others? Next slide. Is it possible there are more kickbacks in military sales than Wall Street investors coming in and they will be out of the loop? Another concerning issue to me, I've read the news, I've watched the news. Why do we allow another foreign country to come to the country, to the Philippines, to set up military presence, to have military exercises here? Why don't we focus on attracting more the Japanese investors, Japanese factories, if there are still Japanese factories? My question is to our experts and to the government people and the media, is it to normalize and make less controversial the existing controversial BFA, the existing EDCA facilities in the Philippines? Is this a strategy na you invite all the other countries, Australia, Japan, maybe France, UK, Netherlands, I don't know who else they will invite, to make the US EDCA presence here not abnormal, not controversial? Is this a strategy? To me, that's quite disturbing. I would rather we, the Philippines, focus more on inviting, next slide. Look at what our neighbors are doing. Why don't we invite Japanese investors to come here instead of their DFA and their forces? That is what our neighbors and competitors in ASEAN are doing. They are inviting Japanese factories, not DFA, to Thailand, to Vietnam. Next slide. Look at this. Thailand is inviting all these Japan and China factories, not military forces, to Thailand. It's parang weird priority. Next slide. Look at this. Next slide. Next slide. Look at this. Even Americans. America fought a war with Vietnam and lost their war in Vietnam. But when they go to Vietnam now, the top priority of Vietnam is American investment, American tourism, not talking nonstop about American military presence in Vietnam, not inviting US troops back to Vietnam. I think this is the smartest foreign policy priority, economic progress. Next slide. Look at this. Even Japanese enterprises going to Vietnam, our competitor, not Japanese military forces, it's very weird our politicians are talking about Japanese BFA in the Philippines when our competitors, our neighbors, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, all of them are talking about Japanese investment, China investments in their countries. Next slide. Vietnam, by the way, recently reaffirmed that there will be no foreign military base or foreign military presence in their country. I think that is a very smart, wise national policy. It also gains them the respect of all the Asian neighbors, including the foreign superpowers. Next slide. To show you that our politicians, many of them have wrong priorities, inviting US military instead of business, inviting or attracting Japanese military through BFA instead of Japanese business. Even in our relationship with China, unfortunately, some of our politicians seem to have focused on inviting POGOs before instead of the world-class high-tech factories of China. Why? It's a very weird, we have a very weird sense of priority. My question is it because POGOs need to give non-stop bribes to exist here, to get protection money, when the legit and big China factories, export enterprises do not need to keep bribing their way for them to exist in the Philippines? We should change our priorities, please, and woo the investors. Next slide. There's a Carl von Clausewitz said, self-reliance is the best defense against the pressures of the moment. I believe the Philippines should not rely on American military security protection that they claim they will give to us, because all countries are out for their own national interests. All countries are doing things not for altruism. Do not believe that the US is here to protect us as a security guard for free. Security guard na walang sweldo, security guard na siya ang gagastos ang uniforme niya, pati guardhouse niya. Hindi totoo yan. They are here. America is here for their own national interests, not our interests. So we should build self-reliance and our own self-defense, not rely on visiting forces of other countries. Next slide. There are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies in the world, only permanent interests. Let us remember that when we deal with the EDCA issue and with the BFA, and do not be naive, all of us, hopefully. Next slide. Saan yung next slide? Wala. Ito. Why do we allow, my question to all the intellectuals and the politicians, why do we allow foreign military presence in our country, the Philippines, to countries who are strategic rivals of our neighbor China? Look at the map. The Philippines is physically the closest neighbor of Taiwan Island. Why do we allow these forces here when Taiwan is, sabi nga ni Professor Ana Malindogoy at the start of this Pandesal Forum, that Taiwan is a potential flashpoint for geopolitical rivalry and even war. Why do we allow foreign forces to come near using our territory and heightening the tensions in the region? Look at the map. Taiwan is so near the Philippines. Tama si General Victor Corpus. If anything happens to Taiwan and the Philippines is unnecessarily dragged into a war that is not of our national interest and has nothing to do with the Philippines, ang masisira yung syudad natin, our cities, our economy, not the economies of the foreign powers halfway around the world. They will just keep on sending their weapons here like the way they're doing in Ukraine. They're sending all their billions and billions of weapons, but the country is ruined in Ukraine. And Taiwan, everybody knows, has been declared by China repeatedly in public as one of their national core interests. Now, this was for short historical background. Some countries claim Taiwan is independent or separate, but it has never been an independent nation in history. It was taken by Japan in 1895 and became the first Japanese colony. When Japan was rising as a superpower, they said, kailangan din namin ng colony. Kasi uso It was the fashion of the world at that time. If you were a superpower, you had to have colonies at that time. The British had colonies. America tried to have colonies also, the Philippines and all the other. So Taiwan was their first colony. And then it was returned to China after World War II by the Allies when Japan was defeated and separated again in 1949 due to what most Chinese in the world consider, and especially in China, an unfinished civil war. Hindi pa tapos yung storya nila. So I hope we are not dragged into this war unnecessarily. Next slide. Ito yung sinabi ni General Victor Corpus earlier. It's almost similar to our situation. Look at this. The Ukraine war, some American experts are saying, even Henry Kissinger before was warning the American politicians, do not expand NATO too much. Do not keep on surrounding Russia. It will make them paranoid and angry and might cause troubles. This is the map of all the blue countries are those part of NATO and EU. NATO is the American-led military alliance. And then Russia is the red country. And then, we have this tragedy of war. Let us not repeat these tensions in Asia, in our neighborhood. Next slide. This is another map of the NATO countries. And the green countries in Ukraine is a country applying to be NATO member. So all countries do not want their front door to be militarized. Next slide. This is what some experts are saying. The line that being sold to the media in our country, in the Philippines, they're trying to demonize our neighbor China, saying that China is horrible, China is terrible, and Philippines is under threat. That's the story, na magandang storyline. And there's this saintly superpower coming over to be the security guard for free. Libreng sweldo, libreng guardhouse tatayuan niya. Tatayo siya ng guardhouse para maging security guard mo for free. But actually, when you are in China, tama si General Victor Corpus. General Victor Corpus is I learned this from him a few years ago and could not forget the analysis of General Victor Corpus. He explained very in detail that China is now the second richest economy in the world, the largest. All their factories and financial centers are in the coastal regions of Shanghai, Guangzhou, Nanjing, all these prosperous cities. And then when you are there looking out through the window of your skyscrapers and buildings, you have all these American military bases surrounding you all over the sea. So that is what is the situation, the larger picture. Do we want the Philippines, our country, which is a friend of all powers and countries, to be part of this rivalry of two superpowers? And we are hosting, sabi ni General Corpus kanina, 8 EDCA case bases, I think 5. I don't know how many talaga. And then we want to have more pa scattered all over the country. Let us please think about our own national interests and not be involved in the rivalry of these two superpowers. In fact, we should be the peacemaker. In fact, we should be the middleman in the trade of these two superpowers instead of being a source of more conflict and tension between them. Next slide. This is just one of the books in the West about what General Corpus earlier said, NATO surrounding Russia, sparking this unfortunate, tragic war in Ukraine. Next slide. Very quick lang. They keep saying the pro-EDCA and pro-BFA people are saying we should have all these foreigners here because China is a perceived threat now. But what is the real story of Philippines in the past 1,000 years in our encounters with all the foreign countries in the world? Next slide. All the foreign countries that came here, we could list them down. In 1500s, the Spaniards came, they colonized the country, they literally ninakaw ang bansa, sinakop ang bansa natin, sinalakay, attacked, invaded, and enslaved the Philippines for 333 years. Next slide. Yun, next slide pa. They killed the Filipino priest Combursa, may Maria Clara pa. Next slide. Next slide pa. They also killed the doctor and novelist, our national hero. Next slide. The second country that we encountered in the Philippines, foreign country, was the British. In 1762, they also invaded, occupied Manila for 2 years, colonized us, part of it. Next slide. They also looted, by the way, when they came, they looted Manila for 40 days. You go to the British Museum in London, they have, I think, the best collection of Philippine antique books and also cultural artifacts, which Jose Rizal was amazed to see. That was ninakaw during the British invasion. And then, of course, the Americans, they came 1899. They also invaded, we forgot. They also caused a lot of deaths. Estimates of deaths in the Philippines during the Philippine-American War was 200,000 to 1 million people now, mostly through the famine and disease. Next slide. That is the third country that occupied us. The next country was Japan, the country that we want to invite for BFA. World War II, almost 1 million people in the Philippines died out of 13 million people. And I want to point out that our neighbor, Thailand, stayed neutral throughout World War II, most of the time. And the peculiar situation of Thailand, they are very lucky. They were able to maintain independence continuously. They were never colonized by any European. So it did not give Japan an excuse to attack them, because Japan attacked all the Asian countries in ASEAN that were colonized by the West. And they claim they want to liberate us now. Next slide. Next slide. These are the foreign countries that attack us. Next slide. In the 1,000 years the Chinese have been in the Philippines, China, anong dinala nila? Hindi gera. Siopaw, siomai, mami, tsaka lumpiang Shanghai. Yun ang kwento ko. Plus trade. Next slide. Trade. For over 1,000 years, China has been coming and going from China to the Philippines, entirely focused mainly on trade. Noon pa hanggang ngayon, negosyo lang inatupag ng China. Saka obsession nila, hindi gera, hindi pananakop, hindi colonization. Even the story of Limahong is distorted and a little bit biased. Hindi siya bansa ng China. He is a pirate who came here. So mostly trade talaga and no record of war and colonization. Unfortunately, China is now being demonized non-stop there seems to be a public relations campaign to demonize China para makalibre ang, so they will have rental-free use of our military bases. Next slide. This is a painting of national artist Botong Francisco of pre-colonial Filipinos trading, bartering with Chinese traders. Hundreds of years before the Spaniards came to steal and colonize the Philippines. Next slide. An example I would like to cite for Philippines, for our country to hopefully learn some valuable lessons. Switzerland, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, perhaps the richest in Europe and the world. It vigorously upholds what it describes as armed neutrality. And 2 years ago, before the pandemic, Credit Suisse reported that Switzerland had the highest wealth per adult in the whole world. No, it's not a coincidence or accident. I think it's correlated. If you are a neutral country, if the whole world perceives you as non-aligned, not biased, not against any superpower, you will have political stability. You will attract all the investors and money and business. So that is the long-term success, one of the secrets behind Switzerland's long-term success. What is armed neutrality? Armed neutrality is the attitude of a country that makes no alliance with either side in any war or any rivalry. So yun ang totoong neutrality. Next slide. This is a philosopher, Kierkegaard. Sabi niya, my standpoint is armed neutrality. That means you have to self-arm yourself. You have to be vigilant, like Switzerland, and guard your neutrality, no matter what. Next slide. Not only neutrality, which I hope the Philippines, we could follow. They are not only passive neutral country, Switzerland, they are active also facilitator of peace. They are supporting peace building worldwide. So the Philippines, our country, should not only focus on enriching our economy, we should also be exponent of peace and stability in Asia, not be a source of conflict by inviting all these military forces here and buying all these arms from everywhere. Next slide, please. I just want to remind everyone, and also our politicians, Philippines signed with other ASEAN countries December 15, 1995, Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty. We want to make Southeast Asia a region that is free of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. This treaty is also called the Bangkok Treaty. Let us remind our politicians that if we allow EDCA bases and all these other bases here, can we guarantee that there will be no nuclear weapons there? Next slide. Some people want to demilitarize. I propose that we demilitarize ASEAN, but every country should build up our own national defense. Next slide. No to nuclear weapons everywhere. Next slide. The Swiss president, the president of Switzerland this year, during the World Economic Forum, he explained very well what could be a good role model for the Philippines. The laws of neutrality for Switzerland are based on the Hague Agreement principles, which include no participation in wars, international cooperation, but no membership in any military alliance, no provision of troops or weapons to warring parties, and no granting of transition rights. Even BFA is not allowed in Switzerland because we all know, even if we are not lawyers, we were not born yesterday, BFA is a legal loophole used by our clever politicians and the politicians of other countries to violate, to skirt around the constitutional ban on foreign military presence in the Philippines. Next slide, please. Our neighbor, the rising superstar of ASEAN, which I believe will become the richest country in ASEAN because of their smart foreign policy and economic policies, is our neighbor and competitor, Vietnam. They have what they call the four no's. Apat na hindi, apat na ayaw. What are these? Vietnam upholds a policy of four no's. No joining of military alliances, number one. No siding with any country against another country. Number three, no giving other countries permission to set up military bases in Vietnam. And number four, also no use of their territory to carry out any military activities against other countries. And not using force or threatening use of force in international relations. These are the guiding principles of our neighbor Vietnam, which, by the way, relies on their own military capabilities. Alam mo nyo, I would ask General Victor Corpus later on, sana hopefully he could enlighten us. I have a theory that we have the weakest, lousiest military defense capability in ASEAN, the Philippines. Precisely, I think, partly because we have this wrong idea, we have this imagination that we have a ninong or an uncle or a godfather guarding us for free. We have the security guard. So we have this wrong notion. So we have not even tried to build up a decent defense capability. Due to Vietnam's independent foreign policy, genuine independent foreign policy, and not allowing any foreign military presence in their country, whether visiting forces or military bases, I think Vietnam will become the next economic powerhouse and inspiring success story of ASEAN. They will surpass us by miles and miles and kilometers because our politicians, unfortunately, tragically, I don't know why, are always talking to the US about military bases, military arms sales, when they should be talking about more trade access to the American market. They are still a huge market. More loans, more investments, more tourism. Why? The talk is always about military alliances, military bases, for free, not even rental. Next slide. Ayun, let us make ASEAN economic progress place, not arms race region. Next slide. I'm not a religious person, but there's a Bible verse, Matthew 5:9, to remind all of us, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Mapalad daw ang mga gumagawa ng paraan para sa kapayapaan, sapagkat sila ay ituturing na mga anak ng Diyos. Matthew 5:9. Huwag tayo maging anak ng demonyo by being a source of tension, being a source of discord in Asia, by allowing military bases or visiting forces, whatever, in our territory. We endanger not only our Philippine national security, we become a target of other countries that are adversaries of the foreign power here, but we also aggravate the tensions in geopolitics in Asia. Let us be a force for peace and progress and focus on economics, not military. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson Flores, for that very extensive and very enlightening presentation. Just to give us a little bit of the important points that Mr. Flores have shared with us, I think what he's saying is that we have it seems like our foreign policy priorities are kind of weird, no? In a way, because instead of focusing on what is on business, it seems like many of our officials are very much how do you call that, obsessed with military things like BFA and EDCA bases. No, so what Mr. Flores is saying, that instead of military forces or military assets, it would be nice if we can focus more on inviting foreign investors in the country or businesses, and that will help our economy more, not necessarily like additional EDCA bases or BFA with Japan. And then I think what he's also saying, just to summarize, is instead of EDCA bases, we should attract investors to help the country install industrial park or special economic zones. I think that would be more beneficial to the country. For he was saying as well that, you know, having more EDCA bases in the country is not necessarily the interest of the country. It's not the supreme interest of the country, but more the interest or the national interest of the United States. So instead also of being a possible source of conflict because of these military issues and also military agreements with the United States and probably with Japan, if in any case it will push through, I hope not, we should be a source or be an exponent of peace and can be a peacemaker. And I think that's very, very important statement coming from him. So those are very important points that Mr. Wilson actually shared with us. But before I go on and proceed to the next part of this media forum, which is the open or the question and answer section or segment, let me just read some of the comments in the chat box. And I encourage our audience both in social media and also here in Zoom to post your comments or post your questions, no? And I'll try to accommodate them as much as possible. So a comment from Mr. Ado Paglinawan, who is also our colleague and a friend and also very a nationalist intellectual. Sabi niya, Wilson Flores just confirmed that, like the title of my first book, the Filipino has a problem for every solution. Our politician, including, well, he named Risa Hontiveros, which is a current senator in the country, have too much testosterone but lacking in brain matter. That's very provocative, Kaado. The Americans are just eager to die. According to Kaado, another comment from him is like, Americans are just very eager to die up to the last Filipino. And then from Rizal, Raul, Vietnam has more consistent or is more consistent and coherent in terms of its policy on foreign investors. So, and then Kahirman Laurel said that Vietnam power rates are 50% lower than the Philippines. I think this is more on the economic, you know, because Wilson has explained earlier that, you know, Vietnam probably will be the economic powerhouse of ASEAN. By the way, just to give you some information, Vietnam surpassed the Philippines in terms of GDP per capita. It's higher than us already. Oh. Before we are higher than them in terms of GDP per capita, but now it's not the same, no? They're higher than us. And I think if we don't look at economics, the country will be left behind in terms of economic growth and development, especially GDP per capita. So I think this is what Mr. Laurel is saying, no?
Madam Ana?
Yes.
Madam Ana?
Yes, sir.
I can
Yes,
see
sir.
Butch Valdez is part of our audience, and maybe
yes,
we can request Butch Valdez to represent Mike Billington for a while because they share the Larousse movement vision and philosophy.
And he's also a nationalist intellectual.
Yes, and I would like to know from Butch Valdez what Mike would be saying if he were able to join us today.
Yes, Kamentong. Professor Butch Valdez, please free to unmute yourself and please share your perspective on the topic. Again, the topic is all about the 5 additional EDCA bases that is, you know, the United States is eyeing to install in the Philippines, and of course is still under discussion. And the other one is the BFA, the Basic Forces Agreement between the Philippines and Japan, which is under discussion, you know, and the Defense and the Department of Foreign Affairs are coordinating and talking about this. What are your perspective and your views thus far? Before we continue with the open forum later, Professor Valdez, you can freely speak now.
Former Undersecretary.
Yeah.
Yes, he is also a former Undersecretary.
Thank you and good morning. To Mentong's comment as to whether I can represent Mike Billington. I am not representing him, but I can assume that he might inform us that there is a worldwide movement now being initiated by the LaRouche organization yeah, and by senators and government officials in Mexico, in Latin American countries, and on the worldwide movement for peace, yeah, focused on precisely the growing tensions in different parts of the world who may most likely use nuclear weapons. No? So there is that invitation that's going to be given to us to join that worldwide movement, and you might be able to check it out in the larouche.com website. Now, I just wanted to make a comment on some of the things that I've heard in this last so many minutes. First of all, I congratulate General Vic Corpus for his viewpoint and historical presentation, most especially starting with Wolfowitz. Wolfowitz, as you might know, was one of those individuals or animals, together with George Shultz, that initiated the EDSA revolution. We might think we have done it ourselves, but this was all through the initiation of the CIA and of course, George Wolfowitz, who was Secretary of State then, and his Undersecretary of State, Wolfowitz, who was based in Indonesia at the time all of these were being planned. Okay, right after that, as Vic Corpus had pointed out, they developed basically it's the doctrine of first strike. They said that the U.S. will strike at any country which they feel is a threat to their security. First strike doctrine, which preemptive strike, as differentiated from the past 10 years, President Xi has said that the policy of China is we will not make the first shot. The first shot is not going to come from China. So you can see these are the two principal military positions that they are announcing to the world. One says we will strike at anyone we feel we don't like. The other says we will not fire the first shot. I think it's very important. Secondly, I will differ from the opinion that we will be like the Philippines will be used like a Ukraine. I suppose in the idea that Ukraine is just a pawn of the US and NATO to go against Russia. I differ from that in the sense that the Philippines is not a pawn. It's an actual military base, and not just a military base of conventional weapons. We are being expanded into a nuclear military base. And the war that's going to be fought when we become the battlefield is not a conventional war in the same way that they are now fighting in Ukraine. The war that will be fought in the Philippines will almost immediately become nuclear in character. Why? Because we are not contiguous to China. We are separated by a body of water. And the only way you can fight each other by that time is to destroy the other's capability to destroy you. It is convenient for the United States that we have stupid leaders and have had stupid leaders for the past so many past administrations who surrender our sovereignty. These leaders are from top to bottom. Of course, you see them around. They sell their souls to the US for a lot of, I'm sure, for a big sum of money. But the problem is they're also selling the Filipino lives, 100 or so Filipino lives in the process. And they may, that in effect is a collective treason on all of them. The leader, which is the president, probably has the intellectual competence to understand what's going on, that the Philippines is strategic area for the superpowers, and whoever controls the Philippines basically has a very important advantage over those that want to control the passageway, the passageway, the corridor, the economic corridor, which comprises the China Sea. Now, we are in a certain situation that our leaders understand this, but it takes a moral courage to assert our sovereignty. It is not enough that we say that the Philippine foreign policy is to be friend to all and enemy of none. I agree with Wilson Flores that there has to be a proactive move on the part of the Philippines to promote peace. Now, when we do this, it's very difficult because we are a victim country of this geopolitical movements. But we can use our ASEAN strength, like the strength of 10 nations and a population of 400, 500 million, together, collectively, to promote peace. And there are methods that can be used once we do a collective effort. One will be to join the international call for peace. The other is to organize a movement similar to the one that was started in 1955, the Bandung Conference, where it was a movement of non-aligned nations. So that can be done, and our voice will be heard through that movement. Yes, economic cooperation is much more logical than, of course, nuclear conflict. But the U.S. and Britain and the rest of NATO do not want economic cooperation to be the solution. They want to impose military forces to maintain their hegemony over the world. Of course, the only two countries right now that can defend their sovereignty against such formidable power is the Russians and the Chinese. All the other countries, Japan and the rest of them, singularly cannot impose themselves on the whole world. But the US and NATO feel that they can impose themselves using their military. And this is where the situation of the Philippines lies. We need a more assertive leader that's going to finally stand up against this colonial power who have never really given us the independence that we want. We have independence on paper, but not in real independence. They have kept our economy in such a state that we will not be able to even increase our defense capability. They have kept our economic situation in such a state that the people who vote their leaders can easily be bought off. And the agencies used for cheating so that their leaders, their chosen leaders, can be put out to lead the people are easily bought off. So that the leaders that have been chosen in quotes by the people are easily bought off. That is the situation of the Philippines. Now, we are not too sure about this present leader. We hope he will be a change from the quality of leaders that we have experienced in the last 4 or 5 decades. But if you want to save our country, let us save it first with a leader with intellectual competence and the moral courage to do what is right for our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Butch Valdez, for that very enlightening as well as encouraging sharing a perspective on the said issues. Just want to highlight 3 things that he said that I think the Filipino people should reflect, and should also internalize. First and foremost is that we can be heard. Our voice can be heard if we to a certain extent stage an international campaign for peace. Peace is important, not only for the Philippines, but for the whole world. The second one is, I think what he's saying is there's a possibility if we will initiate or probably revive the spirit of the Bandung Conference, a movement of non-aligned nation, especially with the current geopolitical tensions and realities, and also the so-called geopolitical rivalries between, not necessarily only between China and the United States, but you have also Russia in there, what you have in the Ukraine crisis at the moment. And the third one, I think, is very, very important for the Filipino people, and I agree with him 100 or 200% or more. We need a leader, or we need to have more assertive leader with intellectual capacity, strength, to stand for our country and to stand against colonial masters before, and then assert our own independence in a real sense, in a genuine sense, and national interest. I think these are important points that Professor Valdez shared to us, that I think the Filipinos like us, should try to, internalize and embrace, because if we want to secure our future as a country and the future of the next generation of Filipinos, these are important notions or ideas, I think. So before I proceed to the question of some of our friends, because there are some questions actually at the moment, let me again just read some of the comments, because these are also very important comments coming from our audience here in Zoom. And they have also their own perspective about this issue. Like, for example, well, this is a comment, I think, from Jovino de Guzman. Sabi niya, I suggest a national conversation on this issue. Well, I think he's referring to EDCA and military agreements with the United States and the BFA, with possible BFA with Japan and the Philippines. But perhaps Malacanang will make the decision on this matter. What do you think? Do you think, I think the question is more like this. Do you think the president or the Malacanang, the palace, will agree to this BFA or at the same time with this EDCA basis? Is there a possibility, or do you think PBBM will not go for it? Will just tell the Americans and Japanese, oh no, that's not our priority. So that's one of the questions coming from Mr. Jovino. And I will ask
Ateneo.
Professor. Sir. Dr. Jovino.
Jovino Binoy.
I think this question is very, very important and very relevant for at least the Malacanang, would hear the perspective of our experts, and this is a voice coming from a Filipino intellectual and nationalist as well, But before you answer the question, let me read again Mr. Al Galang comment. Sabi niya, correct ka Kamentong. People should go out in streets in unison as we see Egypt, France, HK, UK, Hong Kong, I think, etc., to voice out their minds and hearts' desire. Just make sure no communists join the street action. Okay, from Tel Aviv, kay Adrian Pascual naman, sabi niya, the Philippine government needs to decide if it will be political or pure business. And also, Ken Benedicto actually has a question. Sabi niya, Professor Butch, baka takot sila matulad kay Allende. I think referring to our leaders. And I think this is the last thing that I will mention for now in terms of comments. Sabi niya man ni Kamentong, I think the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies will initiate a movement to start the clamor for abrogation of EDCA and BFA, straighting with a big conference in UP Theater and push for the demonstration outside Malacanang. Oh, I will be most excited if that will if this will be staged soon, and I hope it will be a hybrid. Please make it hybrid. So let's go back to the question, I think, of Mr. Jovino, Professor Jovino. Sabi niya, anong tingin nyo, yung ating bang presidente, tingin nyo, i-go niya itong EDCA basis or not? And if in any case, what will be the reason for him to say yes, and what will be the reason for him to say no? What do you think in terms of what is happening in the Philippines at the moment? And also, I think accompanied to that question is another question from a friend. Ang sabi niya, kaya daw ang Pilipinas ay naging gusto itong 5 additional EDCA bases kasi daw kailangan daw natin ng funds to modernize more or modernize further our armed forces of the Philippines. So ito daw yung ginagamit na justification at the moment, kaya itong EDCA, yung additional na hinihingi na EDCA bases ng United States is being considered to a greater extent. What is your view and perspective on this? Especially when you talk about armed forces modernization, na sa tingin ko, bata pa lang ako, ay naririnig ko na hanggang ngayon ba? Ganun pa rin ba ang justification na ginagamit? I mean, bata, when I say bata, I'm just in elementary or high school, I think, and no, I'm an adult, So I would ask our panel of experts to make comment on this 2 questions that are very much connected. And yeah, we can start probably with Sir Vic, and then from Sir Vic, we can go to Professor Boots, and then Wilson Flores, and probably if Kamentong has some things to share.
General Vic? Any reaction, any comments?
Sa modernization, especially Sir Vic, na yun daw ang justification para magkaroon pa ng additional EDCA bases. Kailangan daw ng pondo. Wala daw pera ang Pilipinas ngayon. Natawa si Sir Vic.
Para sa akin, yung modernization ng armed forces, useless yung pagbili natin ng mga modern weapons like mga modern warships, modern tanks, modern fighter aircraft. Kasi sa sa development ng warfare, yung tinatawag na revolution in military affairs. Yung mga ganyang klaseng weapon, they will not survive the modern battlefield. Tingnan niyo yung nangyayari sa Ukraine. Yung kanilang mga weapon systems na tinutulong ng Western powers and the United States. Oras na dumating sa Ukraine, agad na nawawasak. Dahil lang yung because of the development of modern warfare, may bagong batas ngayon na umiiral. If the enemy sees you, you are dead. And yung mga weapon systems, yung mga modern weapon systems ngayon, yung mga modern tanks, yung mga artillery, hindi magsusurvive yan dahil they are very visible in the modern battlefield. Kaya oras na dumating yung mga weapon system na yun, wasak ka agad. Because they can be monitored by mga drones or by satellite. So dapat pag-isipan ng ating mga leaders natin kung paano magmo-modernize, kasi masasayang lang yung gagastusin natin pera kung bibili tayo halimbawa ng mga barko de gera. Kahit 10, 20, within minutes, all those modern ships or modern aircraft will be gone. Halimbawa, bibili tayo ng 2 dosenang mga F-35, for instance, yung pinaka-modern na aircraft ng Amerika. Saan mo ilalagay yan? Sa Basa Air Base? Mactan Air Base? Within minutes, wasak lahat yan. Kasi yung balance of forces, yung capability ng China, they can destroy all the bases in the Philippines. Air bases. Pag nawala yung air bases, ano ang halaga ng mga modern stealth aircraft na bibilin mo na pagkamahal-mahal? Within minutes, they will be gone. Ganon din yung mga modern warships na gusto natin bilhin. Hindi tatagal yan because China has modern anti-ship ballistic missiles na kaya nilang palubugin kahit na anong barko de gera from Japan up to Guam. Yan ang range ng kanilang anti-ship ballistic missiles. Yung mga base militar na gustong ipaligi in China, yung mga EDCA bases na yan, they will not last minutes in the modern battlefield. Kasi kayang-kaya silang wasakin ng mga missile swarm attacks na halimbawa yung mga DF-17 ng China. Isang dosenang DF-17 sa isang military base. They will not, within minutes, wasak lahat yan. That is the nature of modern warfare today. Na dapat pinag-aaralan din ng ating mga leader dahil nagbabalak tayo i-modernize ng ating military. But if you look at the balance of forces in the region, yung ating military na i-modernize natin, hindi tatagal ng kahit na 1 oras sa modern battlefield. That is the revolution in military affairs is such that it has changed the nature and character of warfare. Ang king of battle ngayon, mga missiles, hindi na mga tangke, hindi na mga warships. And libo-libo ang missile ng China. Yan ang hindi alam ng karamihan. na akala nila yung maglalagay kayo ng mga bases dito para upakan ng ang China. Maglalagay ka ng mga missile. Oras na nakita ng mga satellite yan ng China, uunahan tayo ng China. Hindi magpapauna ang China sa atin. Dapat maging maliwanag yan sa ating mga leader. Dapat dapat pag-aralan nila yung balance of forces. Na ngayon, lamang na lamang ang China. Doon sa aking mga research, yun ang lumalabas. Walang laban ang Amerika when it comes to conventional war. Yan ang gustong i-impose ng RAND Corporation, yung kanilang war with China, na sabi nila ililimit nila sa conventional. It will not be limited to conventional dahil sa conventional walang laban ang Amerika. If they study the balance of forces, walang laban ang Amerika dito sa region na ito when it comes to conventional war. Because China has all the missiles to destroy all the bases of the United States that is surrounding China. China has the capability to destroy all the warships, including submarines. And China has the capability to destroy all the C4ISR that are satellite based. Yan ang capability ng China ngayon. And they can do it within minutes or hours when the first shot is fired.
If I may, yeah. So if I may, General and Madam Anna, I'd just like to now remind people of several things. For example, the South Korean planes, I think a dozen that we bought and was delivered just earlier this year, only 3 are flying. Out of 12, only 3 are flying. And then, of course, we should not forget the C-130 crash in 2021, mid-2021, that killed 53 Philippine military servicemen. That was a second-hand C-130 we bought from the United States under the military defense agreement. The present promise of the United States for the EDCA, and I assume the 5 additional EDCA, is $66.5 million earmarked for EDCA projects with U.S. according to the Department of National Defense. Now, I suppose there are some people who will benefit from these transactions, both in terms of construction materials and so on, and maybe that is one of the motivation. But the fact is, I have an article in the Asian Century Philippines website, where edited also by Kaado Paglinawan, that we have subsisted on scraps from the United States and its allies for the past since 1951 Mutual Defense Agreement, and we have never achieved any sort of independence in our defense posture. So if we continue this way, we won't be going anywhere, especially with the insights that General Corpus has just provided. Let me also remind the audience and our people that the countries that fought off the Americans, starting with the Korean War, did not have modern equipments. It was based on their sense of national sovereignty and will. The North Koreans with the PLA, People's Liberation Army of China, defeated the Americans in the Korean War without warplanes, jet planes, without tanks. The Vietnamese defeated the French and then the Americans using guerrilla warfare. So that's Vietnam. And of course, in other theaters of war, we have seen in Afghanistan, the Taliban use patience and guerrilla warfare to defeat the entire might of NATO and the United States. So those are some lessons from the history of mankind. We do not need scraps from the United States to defeat an enemy if there is a real enemy. But there is none. That's an important point, because the Americans and the American boys keep pointing to China and the South China Sea issue as a cause for building up this alliance with the United States, when in 2016, 2017, and 2019, the National Security Advisor of then President Duterte, no other than Hermogenes Esperon, said repeatedly, and it's 3 times on record in newspaper reports, China is not an enemy. Esperon said, retired General Esperon said, China is a friend. It is a trading partner. It is a source of support for our build. So there is no external enemy except the external enemy that is already inside the Philippines, and that is the United States of America. Back to you, Madam Ana and General.
Okay, thank you so much, Sir Vic, General Corpus, and Kamentong. Again, I will try to ask Mr. Wilson Flores, I think, and Professor Butch to comment on the question of Professor Jovino. That what do you think? Will the president say yes to this BFA with Japan, and also this push by the United States to have additional EDCA bases in the country, which is 5. So in total, if in any case, it will be 10. And then there's also a question here posed by one of our friends in the Zoom, and I think you can also address this, is what's the procedure? Will the 5 more military bases to undergo? What will happen? How it will be approved? I think this is more the question. Will it need Congress to ratify, or just waiting for DND and DFA to ratify it? That's the question. In terms of, if in any case, they're talking already about EDCA bases, no? So will Congress has to approve this, or it will just be an executive approval? Because EDCA, if we recall, it did not went through the concurrence of the Senate, I think, and it's more of an executive agreement. So even then, the Philippine president can actually abrogate it anytime because it's an executive agreement. But the question is, do you think the president will approve this, will go for it or not? And then, yeah, will it go through this time, Congress, or, agreement or concurrence? I think this question for Professor Butch and Wilson Flores.
Yeah. Should I? Am I supposed?
Yes, sir. Yes, Professor Butch.
Well, if the question is whether the president is going to approve the EDCA or not, the additional EDCA or not, I hope not.
Yes.
The reason the question is being posed is for people seem to be in doubt whether he will admit it or not. No? Common sense and national security sense, no? And everything else that has been said in this forum points to the president should reject. Not only should it reject the additional bases, it should reject all of these installations that have already been done and tell them that they are not welcome. No? But before I do that, I don't want to lose my thought about the military capability. Throughout the history of man, I suppose, there have always been strong and ascendant countries with bigger armies than the others. And even during those times when the territories have been disputed, small countries with the smaller armies sought to defend their territory. They lost to the bigger countries. Nevertheless, they fought it. Why? Because it was the nature of these countries, nations, or peoples to have their own military capability to assert their sovereignty over the area that they occupy. No matter how small they are, they always had an army to assert their sovereignty. And it is no different now. Whether we are a weak country, a poor country, it is incumbent upon our people and our leaders to come up with a capability to show that we are a sovereign nation. Any country without a military is not a sovereign nation. It is a colony. Our sovereignty has already been taken over by a colonizer. That is what had happened. That is what happens. Now, the Philippines, as you said before, we used to have this and that capability. Yes. But if you notice, I mentioned that our economic capacity to generate the resources so that we can at least have a modicum of a military capability to defend our shores, our territories, has been cut down systematically and historically by putting the surrogate economists of the US and the Europeans into our leadership. When you destroy the country's capability to defend itself by destroying their economy, and our economy has been in process of destruction for some time. That is why when people criticize President Marcos for the various reasons, I open up and say, no, it is not this Marcos. But if there was a fault of Marcos, it is the appointment of his finance minister as the head of the economic team that will bring us supposedly to a recovery. My position is he will not, Ben Jokno is not going to bring us to recovery. It is a lie that we are not going to face a recession. It was a lie that we had. It was a lie that they did not admit that we had a recession previous to COVID. Why? Because I do not believe the figures that they generate. Figures do not lie as a principle, but liars can figure, and they use it to mislead the people into accepting our deteriorating situation, deteriorating to defend ourselves. I think this must be an important issue. When you're talking sovereignty, it also means economic sovereignty. And that subsequent to that will generate military capability to defend your shores. My last point is what Mentong had said. We're talking about invasion. We're talking about something. We have been invaded. There are military installations in our shores, submarines in our territories, battleships and all of that, all pointing to China. And we do not cry foul. Our politicians, our president has not declared our sovereignty with regard to this. If we are a sovereign nation, these people here who are not invited to be here must be declared persona non grata or countries non grata. They should be taken out And if they insist to stay here, yes, we don't have the capability to kick them out. But they are here uninvited on their own will, imposed on a sovereign Philippines. That makes them enemy number one. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Boots. I think what is important is what Professor Boots said. Economic sovereignty is important, not only that, would lead more to our political sovereignty, and we need to declare that, I think. We need to embrace that and declare it. Yes, Mr. Wilson, please.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Ana Malindokoy. To the questions, very short answer lang ako to several of them. Si kay Professor Dr. Joby Miroy and the others, I think we are still a political democracy, even though our leaders might have already ideas or inclinations of how they will decide on these EDCA and BFA issues. It is important that we voice out our opinions. It is important for civil society, for the critical mass media, intellectuals like you, like Mentong Laurel, Boots Valdez, General Corpus, and others, to voice out their analysis and opposition to these dangerous, controversial military treaties, which are not good for economic progress of the Philippines, not good for the international image of the country as an investment and tourist destination. It doesn't enhance, these things do not enhance our investment potential. I'm afraid that the big China companies and investors might shy away from investing in the Philippines if we become part of the battleground. I am very, I agree with Mr. Boots Valdez. I stand corrected when I said we might become a pawn of the US in a war with China. He is, I think, more correct when he said we are actually becoming a giant military base of the US. I'd like to modify that a bit. Yun maganda sinabi ni Mr. Boots Valdez. Actually, hindi lang military base, para tayong higanteng aircraft carrier ng Amerika. We are becoming a giant aircraft carrier. The entire article, the Republic of the Philippines is becoming like an aircraft carrier for 10 or more American military bases called EDCA. So thank you for those reminders. I think we have to voice out our voices para public opinion will be favorable, so that President Bongbong Marcos, yung hand niya will be strengthened. Hindi siya maging Allende like what Mr. Benedicto said, because Allende was a president in Chile who was toppled because of its nationalist advocacies. About the other question you mentioned earlier about military imports and suppliers, I hope the Philippines, as a measure of our independent foreign policy and economic common sense, let us diversify our source of military imports also. For the past 100 years, we have been over-dependent on American suppliers. We know that American suppliers are no longer dominant in cars and even in military. Why not diversify to South Korea, Israel, even to China? Cheaper, better, and tama, I agree with General Victor Corpus. The technologies of the 21st century have already canceled all these traditional weapons by the American and European manufacturers. Let us be wiser in spending our limited peso. Diversify our military suppliers, different countries, not only one. Number two, update the technology. Buy less but better technology. And also, I think one more thing is the best way to lessen military expenses is to make sure that we are not aligned with any country. Tama si Mr. Butz Valdez, yung Bandung Conference and the non-aligned movement is the best way to go for the Philippines and ASEAN so that all the superpowers, mahiya silang dalawa gumera sa backyard natin, makipag-away sa backyard natin sa ASEAN.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson Flores, for that very sufficient answer, I think, to all the questions that were posted by our friends and media friends. No? We have limited time. It's already 12:10. So what would I do is ask our experts, our panel of speakers, to give at least 2 minutes closing statement. And probably it's important at this time around, no, to actually send a message or your voice to our leaders, no, and current government, especially in these two issues, BFA and additional EDCA bases. What do you think? What's your suggestion to them in that 2 minutes or 3 minutes closing statement? Because we're already, our time is limited. Thank you so much. So probably we'll start again with Kamentong, then we'll proceed to General Victor Corpus, and then Professor Butz Valdez. And since the sponsor of this media forum is Pandesal Forum, which is hosted by Mr. Wilson Flores, we'll have him as the last to deliver the closing statement. Yes, Kamentong?
Okay, I have 2 points to make. Am I unmuted, no? Okay,
Yes,
2 points. Number 1, I commit to try to organize the general forum in an auditorium somewhere in UP or some academic institutions to expand this conversation and discussion. Number 2, I hope I can find a lawyer or a group of lawyers to file a case again in the Supreme Court to review this legality of the EDCA and the BFA, and maybe ultimately the MDT. And 3, to try to organize before the April 2023 deadline of the review of the EDCA, to try to organize a demonstration outside of Malacanang. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamentong. General Victor Corpus, please, sir. Unmute, Sir Vic.
Yeah. Ang closing statement ko is that sana yung mga liderato natin na magde-decide dito sa EDCA issue, unahin nila ang interest yung national interest o national security interest ng Pilipinas. Na hindi tayo matulad sa Ukraine na inuna nila yung interest ng mga dayuhan. Sila yung nagkakamatayan ngayon. Sana hindi tayo matulad ng nangyari sa Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Sir Vic. And then Professor Butz. Sir Butz. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to say that this period is the probably most critical period of our nation, not only of our nation, but the whole world. Yeah. We are not just discussing theories here or debating about issues. We're actually discussing whether we survive as a people, as a nation, or not. The intentions of these superpowers that want to maintain their hegemony over humankind seems to be going on full force. We are assuming that they are human. We are assuming that they think the same way we think. No. These people that want to maintain their hegemony, their power, are greedy in terms of money and in terms of control of mankind. They have been in control for some time because our financial system, the financial system of the world, using the central banking method, have been controlled by them. Now that system is in process of collapsing, and they will lose their control of the world if this finally caves in. That is why there is a threat that there will have to be a military imposition. This happened for World War I, happened for World War II, and will happen in World War III. Unless we as a people, the Philippines, and with the rest of the world, and most of the world, stand up and reject this notion of war and move towards a new multipolar economic order that will promote peace by a global infrastructure development project. China had already made the suggestion, but this is trying to be stopped by the US and the British. Nevertheless, other countries like India, Russia, the BRICS, South America, African countries are moving towards this suggestion of a global infrastructure project called the BRI. That is a solution towards peace. Because if everybody is working together for the benefit of mankind, there will be no war. It is up to us to make our little voices heard, which will come out to about 8 billion voices, so that this little group of leaders, of crazy and insane leaders, will hear it. Or if we are lucky enough, they will all commit suicide. So let us move. Let us be proactive. Let us be creative, no? Doing everything we can to stop this. Even if we need to go to the streets, like many, many people are now all over the world. Even if we need to go to the streets because we are fighting not just for our lives, we are fighting to survive as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Boots, for that very encouraging, again, closing statement. Yes, Mr. Flores, you're the last but not the least. Please. I think you unmute.
Yes. Thank you to yes. Thank you to all the intellectuals for your wisdom, for your advocacies. First, I would agree with all the speakers that we urge the political leaders of the Philippines to review all the EDCA, BFA, and even the MDT agreements. We are no longer a colony. I agree with Mr. Boots Valdez and General Corpus. As a truly independent country, safeguarding our national interests, we have to review or even cancel all of this. Number two, I remember years ago, maybe you can verify, Professor and others, former Senator Ping Lacson at one time, few years ago, even proposed, if we are sincere in our independent foreign policy, why don't we offer the BFA with China, sabi niya. Just a thought lang, I remember. But personally, I agree with all of you that we have to uphold genuine independent foreign policy similar to what our neighbors are smartly, wisely doing. Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, Singapore, all of them. And I think we cannot have a true independent foreign policy if we still have the military umbilical cord of all these military bases and foreign military presence in our country. And also, I believe that Mr. Butz Valdez is correct. We are turning the country into a huge military base, actually like a giant aircraft carrier in the Pacific Ocean. Again, I'd like to suggest that I hope the Philippines, we can be the peacemaker between East and West instead of being a source of tension, is the source of discord by hosting these foreign military bases here. In the Spanish colonial era, during the galleon trade, do not forget that the Philippines, a small colony, Manila was the entrepot. We were the middleman between China and the West. 250 years of the galleon trade. Maybe in terms of geopolitics, the tensions, we can lead like that also because we have good traditional ties with China for more than 1,000 years. And we are the only American colony in Asia, former American colony. So instead of being a source of discord and confusion and conflict, let us be a peacemaker.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wilson Flores. Our media forum has come to an end. I would like to thank sincerely the people that participated in our media forum, especially to our media friends who are here. And also thank you to our...
Kamuning Bakery, like Rizal
Yes.
Reyes of Business Mirror, he's there. We'll go there and have lunch with him.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for attending this media forum. This is very important. Again, not only to our country and to our country's survival as a nation, even to the for the world. No, and thank you again to our panel of experts for giving their ideas, their experience, and wisdom. And I hope our leaders, no, and the current government will listen to them because look at them. They are more. I think in terms of experience and wisdom, they have it. It comes with age. Actually,
Let's
as
have a
well,
good
no?
picture now.
Don't
forget
wait
now.
muna, tapusin
Sabi
natin
ni
muna to.
Carissa,
And
sorry,
then, yes, yes. And also, thank you, Pandesal Forum Wilson, for hosting this media forum. And again, just to remind our audience, no, both here in Zoom and also in the social media, we have many people watching us through social media. This is not even anymore, from my vantage point, an issue of rivalry between superpowers or contest, no? This is already an issue between peace versus war. And I hope the Philippines will always stand for peace with the rest of the world, especially, and will always stand with peace-loving countries, no? And I think this is my last note, being the moderator of this forum. Thank you so much, and I officially declare that this media forum is closed. Thank you very much to everyone, and have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Yan po ang kaganapan mula sa Kamuning Bakery sa Quezon City. Samantala, para sa ulat ng panahon, tunghayan natin ang inilabas kaninang alas 4 ng hapon ng DOST Pag-asa. Ihahatid sa atin ni weather specialist Raymond Ordenario.
Magandang hapon at para sa magiging lagay ng panahon ngayong araw ng Sabado, November 26, 2022. Makikita natin sa ating satellite images itong ating mga kaulapan na maninipis lamang dito sa buong bansa, kaya inaasahan pa rin natin ang pangkalatang maaliwalas sa panahon, maliban lamang sa mga isolated rain showers or thunderstorm. Dahil patuloy pa rin ang epekto ng Intertropical Convergence Zone dito sa may Mindanao at Palawan area. Sa ngayon, wala tayong nakataas na gale warning sa namang baybay ng ating kapuluan, kaya malayo mga kapalawat ang ating mga kababayang mangingisda at may mga maliliit na sasakyang pandagat. At sa susunod na 3 hanggang 5 araw ay patuloy pa rin inaasahan na wala tayong mabubuong bagyo sa loob ng ating area of responsibility. At para naman sa magiging lagay ng panahon dito sa Luzon area bukas, inaasahan natin ang patuloy na maaliwalas sa panahon, maliban lamang sa mga pulu-pulong mga pag-ulan o pagkidlat pagulog, dala pa rin yan ng mga localized thunderstorm. Agwat ng temperatura dito sa Tuguegarao City ay maglalaro mula 23 hanggang 33 degrees Celsius, 24 to 32 sa Lawag area, samantalang 17 to 26 degrees Celsius dyan sa may Baguio City. Sa mga kababayan natin sa Legazpi City bukas, ang agwatang temperatura ay mula 26 hanggang 31 degrees Celsius, 25 to 33 dyan sa Puerto Princesa at Calayan Island ay 26 to 32 at Tagaytay City ay mula 21 hanggang 30 degrees Celsius. At dito sa Kalakhang, Maynila, ang agwat ng temperatura bukas ay maglalaro mula 23 hanggang 33 degrees Celsius. Bahagyang mainit ang inaasahan natin dito sa may bahagi ng Western Luzon at dito sa may Northeastern Luzon dahil pa rin yan na pag-epekto nga ng ating maliwalas na panahon. Magkakaroon lamang tayo ng malaking tsansa ng mga isolated thunderstorms pagdating ng hapon. Dito naman sa Kabisayhan at Mindanao, aasahan din natin ng patuloy na maliwalas sa panahon, maliban lamang sa mga afternoon rain showers, dala ng mga localized thunderstorms on the Visayas, and dito namang ITCC sa may Mindanao area. Agwat ng temperatura dyan sa Tacloban City ay mula 26 hanggang 32 degrees Celsius, 27 to 31 naman sa Metro Cebu area at Iloilo City ay mula 26 hanggang 32 degrees Celsius. Sa mga kababayan natin dyan sa Cagayan de Oro, bukas ang temperatura ay mula 24 hanggang 31 degrees Celsius, samantalang 24 to 33 sa Metro Davao area at sa may Zamboanga City ay mula 25 hanggang 33 degrees Celsius. Para naman sa outlook natin itong Monday to Wednesday hanggang sa matapos nga ang buwan ng Nobyembre, ay magkakaroon pa rin ng maaliwalas sa panahon dito sa Metro Manila at asahan pa rin ang mga pulupulong mga pag-ulan o pagkulog pagdating yan ng hapon hanggang gabi. Agwat ng temperatura ay mula 24 hanggang 33 degrees Celsius. Dito naman sa Baguio City, maaliwalas sa panahon pa rin ang aasahan hanggang sa matapos ang buwan ng Nobyembre at meron niyang mga afternoon rain showers or thunderstorm. Agwat ang temperatura ay mula 16 hanggang 25 degrees Celsius. Sa Legazpi City, patuloy pa rin ang pangkalatang maaliwalas sa panahon na meron pa rin inaasahang mga pulupulong mga pag-ulan o pagkidlat pagkulog. Agwat ang temperatura ay mula 25 hanggang 32 degrees Celsius. Metro Cebu area, maaliwalas sa panahon hanggang sa katapusan ng Nobyembre at ang agwat ng temperatura ay mula 26 hanggang 32 degrees Celsius at meron din tayong mga tsansa ng mga localized thunderstorm na pwedeng magdulot ng mga panandaliang pag-ulan. Dito naman sa Metro Davao area on Monday and Tuesday ay maaliwalas sa panahon ng aasahan na may mga pulupulong pag-ulan o pagkidlat pagkulog. Pagdating ng Miyerkules, November 30, ay magkakaroon naman ng makulimlim na panahon na may kalat-kalat ng mga pag-ulan at pagkilat pagkulog. Agwat ng temperatura ay mula 24 hanggang 33 degrees Celsius. Ang haring araw dito sa Kamaynilaan ay lulubog ng 5:24 ng hapon at malisisikat siya bukas ng 6:03 ng umaga. Para sa karagdagang impormasyon at sa mga thunderstorm advisories ng mga Pag-asa Regional Centers, sundan kami sa aming social media account on Twitter and Facebook at DUSC_Pag-asa at mag-subscribe sa aming YouTube channel sa DUSC Pag-asa Weather Report at palagi ang bisitahin ang aming website sa bagong.pagasa.dust.gov.ph. At yan ang latest mula rito sa Weather Forecasting Center ng Pag-asa. Raymond Ordinario nag-uulat.
Yan ang ilan sa mga mahalagang balita ngayong araw. Mula sa silid pambalitaan ng Katipunan Channel, ang himpilang maninindigan para sa mahusay at maunlad na kinabukasan. Kathy Cruz, ang tagapaghatid ng katotohanan sa pagbabalita.